Welcome to the February 2022 edition of City Connection, our first of the year. City Connection is the live television program with Grand Rapids Mayor Rosalind Bliss, offering the community the opportunity to hear about efforts from City Hall and beyond. With Community Media Center, I'm Linda Galash, your host. City Connection, today we will feature and welcome to the studio our guest, Judge Nicholas Ayoub from the 61st District Court. Judge Ayoub and Mayor Bliss will talk about the city's relationship with the court and changes in how the court functions in these times of a pandemic. Also later in a City Connection on the show, we will provide time with Mayor Bliss for your questions and comments, that in the second half of the program. So for you to take part in the conversation, you can send us your questions at comments to cityconnection@grcmc.org. Through Twitter, it's at GRTV Access, or by commenting on the GRTV Facebook page. City Connection, a collaboration between Community Media Center and the City of Grand Rapids, is broadcasting live today, February 7th, 2022, here on Community Access Television Channel 24 and live streaming at therepedian.org and at GRTV's Facebook page. We'll be rebroadcasting this program throughout the month on cable channel 25 GRTV. And now in studio with me, Grand Rapids Mayor Rosalind Bliss. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Happy 2022.
And we're deep in it already. New year, and it's off and running. So much going on. One of the most recent pieces of news is that the city manager has selected our next police chief here in Grand Rapids. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. It was a process that included community members' input, a little bit of a search firm that helped kind of define the job and requirements and specialties for the next candidate. So just wanted you to tell us a little bit about our new chief and a little bit about the process, how that went.
Yeah, so thanks. It is exciting. As we all know, Chief Payne shared that he was going to retire late last year, and it was almost immediately that we selected a national search firm to help with the process, knowing that this is such a key position to fill in our city. And so we worked with a national firm who actually had some community engagement on the front end as he finalized the profile and helped with the recruitment materials. Then spent a lot of time out recruiting, and then the city manager and the consultant went through and kind of did the first phase of the process, looking at applicants. And then once the final 3 applicants were identified and made public, the city manager, we had a community forum that was made available where the candidates came here to the city, and then we had these smaller roundtable conversations with some community leaders for an entire day, and the city manager and the consultant really spent quite a bit of time with all 3 candidates. And then there was a community survey where people could weigh in and share their thoughts and feedback and questions. And then ultimately the city manager made the announcement last week. So soon-to-be Police Chief Winstrom joins us from Chicago. He and his family were in town last week. I had a chance to meet him and spend a little bit of time with him. From my perspective, a couple things. One, I remind folks in the community, I did have some people reach out to me about who I wanted selected, and I made it clear that ultimately it's not my decision. It's a decision made by the city manager, and I trust his judgment and support his decision. And then as I had conversations with people about the final 3 candidates, and I personally thought they were all 3 great candidates, each with very different backgrounds, different experience. I'm very happy that soon-to-be Police Chief Winstrom was selected. I think he brings a wealth of experience from Chicago. He's worked in a number of different departments. He has a heart for community and transformation and accountability and transparency, and he has a track record to back that up. So he'll be here in March. He'll be sworn in, I believe, the 2nd week of March. And then he'll hopefully take a little bit of time to get his feet under him and then hit the ground running.
Well, that sounds great, and we hope to maybe have him join us on this program at some point, introduce him to the community and all of that. Times are different from when Chief Payne was selected for the role, and what do you feel was about our new chief, our new soon-to-be chief, that makes him the right person for this time?
Yeah, so I think he brings a lot of different qualities. The time I spent with him, I found him to be incredibly genuine and authentic. The feedback from a lot of the individuals who worked with him in Chicago was exceptional. He clearly has a passion and a personal commitment to not just being the best that he can be, but also in bringing out the best in other people. And he fundamentally believes that part of being a public servant is to work in partnership with community, to sit through and be with people in challenging, difficult times and work together to find solutions. He doesn't shy away from difficult conversations or difficult issues. And I think that is exactly the kind of leader that we need right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that community input, that community involvement is something that came to the forefront when the search began. Also wanted to bring up another subject then, is kind of in that vein, is the Civilian Review Board, and there's a revamp of sorts of that.
Yeah, so Mr. Davis, who leads our Office of Public Oversight and Accountability, actually did a preview of, and I'd say an assessment of all of our different public safety boards and commissions. And as he looked at the Civilian Appeals Board, he made some recommendations about membership, training, orientation, and so we're in the process of implementing a lot of those changes right now. In fact, we have a couple openings left on that board. We'll be making those appointments soon, and then we'll be working with that entire board to make sure that they have the training and the support that they need, not just when there's a case that comes before them, but really ahead of time, so that it's really clear about what their parameters are as an appeals board.
And then clarify for me what the Civilian Appeals Board specifically does and oversees or considers.
Yeah, so when there's a complaint, if there's an incident with the police department, there's an internal affairs investigation. Once that investigation is completed, then if an individual who filed that complaint is unhappy with the outcome of the internal affairs investigation, they can file an appeal with our Civilian Appeals Board. So that they're kind of the civilian appeal of an internal investigation finding.
And what kind of authority or input or weight does that board have?
Yeah, so sometimes, so they've been in existence for a number of years, and sometimes they agree with the outcome of the IA report. So they hear information from both sides. They're able to review the incident or the complaint. At times they've disagreed and they've made a recommendation to send it back. So they can say, this disciplinary action was insufficient, it should be changed, or we think this should happen, and then that is sent back to the city manager and to the police chief to decide if they want to take the recommendation from the Civilian Appeals Board and make a change, or if they disagree. So they have an important role to play, especially for the community. It's an opportunity for them to be heard by their peers, for them to have a body of peers and residents really hear additional information. Some people have complained over the years that internal affairs, their concern with it is that you have police officers investigating an incident and a complaint against a police officer or peer, and some people think that isn't always the best way to investigate a complaint. So this provides an opportunity for people, if they're unhappy with that, to have an appeal process.
Okay. Yeah. Well, another citizen group or another board is the Affordable Housing Group, and there's some news on that.
There is. So we've been talking about this Affordable Housing Fund for a couple years now. With the ARPA dollars, we were able to allocate an additional $5 million to that fund. We set up the fund in a partnership with the Grand Rapids Community Foundation. How we structured it is that there would be an independent board to oversee and make recommendations on how those dollars will be spent to support our efforts around affordable housing throughout our city, really with the hope that we'll use those dollars to fill gaps that we can't currently fill with state or federal dollars. So we have opportunities to get low-income housing tax credits, but there's all these eligibility requirements. It's really much more a tool that can be used for larger scale projects. We know that there's a lot of infill opportunity within our city to provide smaller projects, and that sometimes those projects just need a little bit of support to help get them over that financial stack, struggle sometimes to make the numbers work. And so the fund itself will start off with about $6 million in it. The board is a mix of, so our city manager is going to serve on the board, the CEO of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. Each ward will have an appointee, I have an appointee, and then the other members will be appointed through our appointments committee, and we had well over 70 applicants who are interested in serving on that board. So it's wonderful to see the community interest in that body. We'll finalize the appointments at our city commission meeting tomorrow. The board should have their first meeting in March, and my hope is that we have some recommendations to the full city commission for how those dollars can be spent. So ultimately, the Affordable Housing Fund board will make the recommendations on funding expenditures. Those will come to the full city commission for final approval, and then we'll hopefully get those dollars out in the community.
Okay.
Yeah, exciting.
So on that topic, the city released a report recently that showed that just under 300 housing units became available in the affordable housing tier. What's the goal? What is ideally, and that was for 2021.
Yeah.
So what's the goal? What are we looking for this year, and what kind of growth do we need?
Well, so fortunately, we were much more successful last year at getting low-income housing tax credits. So we had a number of projects, more projects than we have historically, were funded through the state low-income housing tax credit program. So we will have shovels in the ground in a number of higher density, low-income housing projects this year. And then for affordable, and it's, some people feel like low-income housing, we need low-income housing, but we also need affordable housing, which is really for that missing middle, like people who are making 80% and under AMI. So people who are really struggling and unable to pay market rate rent. So that's really that missing middle that we want to start to see an increase in the number of units made available. But the reality is, if you look at the housing needs assessment, we need more housing across the entire spectrum. We need more market rate housing. The vacancy rate for market rate is very, very low. And we know that when we don't have enough market rate, it impacts affordable housing, and that impacts low-income housing. So all of those different types of housing play together. And ultimately, we need housing across the entire spectrum. So my hope for this year is that we will have hundreds of more units built that are low-income housing, really designated for individuals who qualify under the federal low-income standards. Then we would have more market rate housing, and then we'd be able to really come in and help fill that gap around affordability and work with developers to say, if you're going to build a 300 unit market rate, can we incent you to hold 20 of those units and provide them to individuals who are under 80% AMI? So potentially that's how the Affordable Housing Fund could be used.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to take our first break. We've got a lot more questions for later in the show, but things I have to ask you anyway. Well, this is City Connection. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Mayor and Judge Ayoub will be with us visiting shortly. So a break here on City Connection.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push their creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
Hello and welcome back. I'm so delighted to be with our honor from your honor from our district court with us today. I was thinking about this, and I've been doing this show for a number of years now, and I don't think we've had a judge on here, and I don't think we've highlighted the work of the district court. So thank you for joining us today.
Wow, thank you for having us. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited about being here at the GRTV studios. I'm a big fan of GRTV. Okay. With the great Daryl Nathan all the way through all that. So to be here with you and at GRTV is quite an honor. I'm glad to be the first judge to be on the program.
Well, thank you, Judge. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
I was just saying on the break that a lot of people, they really aren't aware of what happens at the district court. But before we get to that, for people who have never met you, I know you were appointed under Governor Snyder, if my memory serves me right, after Judge Elmore won her election and became a circuit court judge. But then you ran and you were elected in 2020, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's all from memory. I'm glad I remember that. So for folks who don't know you, you have some great experience in the field of law. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, how you got to where you are.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not quite a Grand Rapids native, but certainly grew up here in the city's southeast side. I love Grand Rapids. Always knew that I would come back to the city. We've got something special here. I remember particularly, Festival of the Arts. It's a time for our city to shine. And then I lived close to the Hollyhock Lane Parade, and I remember that summer after summer, something special about that parade and that community and the people that lived there. And I knew right away I'd come back to the city of Grand Rapids and hopefully had the opportunity to serve the city and the residents of the city in some capacity. I did practice law for about 15 years. And then when Judge Elmore was elected to the circuit court, there was the opportunity. They were looking to fill that position, and I did express interest and was really excited to be able to come and serve the city in this capacity. And it's been a really enjoyable ride. Quite different than what I would have expected, but really rewarding, yeah.
Remind me where you went to law school.
I went to Michigan State.
God, that's right.
Yeah.
Spartan. Nice,
and,
I love that.
Yeah, and I my practice was mostly appellate law, which was fine, and I enjoy the technical side of the law, the procedure, the ins and the outs. The beauty of the district court is we have that, but we also have an opportunity to really meet people where they are. Every day is different. Everybody's case is different. Everybody's story is different. And I think as especially as municipal courts and district courts that deal with a lot of, we deal with misdemeanors on the criminal side. We handle felonies initially at the pretrial stage, and then we handle lower level civil cases under $25,000. It's often said the district court is the people's court, and it really is. We have a lot of self-represented litigants, and the goal, and we try hard to make sure that no matter if someone has a lawyer, if they don't have a lawyer, they get a fair hearing, a chance to be heard. So that's what we do at the district court, and it's a pleasure.
Yeah, so I have the ability to get updates from our city attorney's office regularly. But for people who don't know the kind of cases that you hear, so you want to elaborate a little bit on those?
Sure.
Okay.
So on the criminal side, and really you have to break the cases up into two sides, the criminal side and the civil side. On the criminal side, we hear misdemeanors, and that a misdemeanor is a crime that's punishable by no more than 1 year in jail. We see a lot of operating while intoxicated. Unfortunately, we see a lot of domestic violence. And those are probably the bigger of the cases that we see. We see a lot of driving while license suspended. But probably the bulk of the most serious crimes we see is driving while intoxicated and domestic violence. One of the things that I think social scientists have really pointed out is that a lot of times there's a whole lot underlying those problems. And courts weren't really designed to handle that, but enough people said, well, why not? What can we do? Can we do something different? And so one of the things that we have embarked on at the 61st District Court and statewide is what we call treatment courts or problem-solving courts. We have a sobriety court. We have two sobriety courts in our jurisdiction and a drug treatment court.
And isn't it correct that we were one of the first in the state of
Yeah,
Michigan?
yes,
So
Judge Bowler, who's now
Yeah.
retired from
Yeah.
the 61st District Court, was really forward thinking on that, and is kind of the ambassador and the captain and architect of what is now our sobriety courts and drug treatment courts. Yeah, it is that especially is a rewarding part of the job. It can be difficult. As you know, anyone going through substance abuse, it's a tough road to hoe. But then to go through that and to walk with people and then to come out on the other end, and we do have a lot of success. It's not something a court traditionally does, but there's no reason a court can't do it, and we're finding that it is very impactful.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm proud of a lot of the work that we've done, especially around sobriety court. And the court has really evolved over time. I mean, I even remember when the city of Grand Rapids, we decriminalized marijuana. So before that, a lot of those marijuana cases came to the district court. And obviously now with the legalization of marijuana, it's really shifted some of the cases that you hear. So do you want to talk a little bit about just how has the court evolved and changed with some of those changing dynamics?
Yeah, and you know, I haven't looked at statistics. I didn't join the court until after marijuana was decriminalized. I've got to imagine though that was a huge chunk of the docket. One thing that I think is a shift in how you handle cases. You know, first and foremost, and the court's number one job is due process. That to provide that forum where everyone gets a hearing, where the rules of evidence are applied, where everyone gets a fair chance to be heard, where the facts have to be proven in a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt, in a civil case by a preponderance of the evidence. That's certainly the primary role of the court. But I think now almost universally we've come to the conclusion that we can do more as courts. While we have people here, we have a connection with an individual. If a person needs service, while the court may not be the appropriate place to provide that service, it can absolutely act as a director and get people lined up with those that can help for the underlying problem that generally can be the cause or the foundation of why the person is in court to begin with. And so it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking about courts. Courts are, by nature, reactive. And part of that you can't get around. That's the nature of due process. We wait for cases to come to us, and we decide those cases. And if the issues aren't raised and the parties don't come, then the court doesn't have an opportunity to do that. But this is one area where the court can kind of be a little bit creative, think a little bit outside the box, while preserving the due process rights of all the parties involved. You can go a long way in providing care and aid to individuals that are at the court. So.
And the court's done a really nice job of really building and strengthening a relationship with a lot of our partners. So Community Mental Health, or Network 180, Department of Health and Human Services, some of our nonprofit organizations, to help do just that, make those connections when it's appropriate and when you can.
Yeah, and we, our Constitution, both the federal Constitution and state Constitution, the primary component is separation of powers. Yeah. And that's important. But it doesn't necessarily mean isolation, for the courts. And so for the courts to know what's available, to be able to provide information, just because we're a focal point, we're a point where somebody is who needs service may find themselves there. Well, why not use that as an opportunity to direct individuals to the services that the city is already providing, that our partners are already providing? It's unfortunate when you see cases that could benefit from those services. It's just a matter of getting someone there. Yeah. So it's kind of a different way to view the role of the court.
It is. So for this segment, we just have 2 minutes left. So maybe our last couple of minutes before we break. The court, similar to the rest of the world, it was almost 2 years ago that at least our city and much of the world closed down because of COVID. We had the stay-at-home order. People were forced to go home. I know the circuit court and district court dockets were put on hold. A lot of things shifted in the court, and the court really had to adapt quickly, and is likely still figuring out some of the implications of the past 2 years. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that's been like for you?
Well, I think people as a whole don't love change. I'd say times that by 10 for courts. Courts really don't like change. But we had no choice. And I think a lot of the credit goes to our Michigan Supreme Court. They really had the insight to be able to provide us with the technology and the means and the support to make the justice system continue to run. So we all learned how to Zoom, and we all have our YouTube channels, and make sure you like and subscribe. And I think that's what you're supposed to say when you have a YouTube channel. And we realized we can do it. It's not always perfect. But we found that a whole lot of people appreciate the accessibility that we can provide. And so I don't think that that will go away. Judges may have different views about it, and it can be difficult at times. But I think what the big takeaway is there is enough people that find the accessibility to be a service to them, and we're in the service business, and so that will be there to some extent, but certainly a whole new world as it was for so many of us trying to adapt.
Yeah. Well, we can talk more about that new world, because I know you've also tried to figure out how we get through backlogs and resolve other issues as we've started to come out of the pandemic. So maybe we'll touch on that after the break.
Wonderful.
So with that, we'll take a break. Thank you again, Judge, for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be back in just a minute.
The Wealthy Theater is Grand Rapids' local movie theater and performance center. Since 1998, it has been a host to nationally touring music groups, local theater performances, and a variety of community events. Today, the Wealthy Theater is not only a landmark community treasure with historic significance, but a pioneer in the infusion of technology and traditional theater. Underneath the elegance and classic sensibility that defines Wealthy Theater, there is a matrix of new technologies. The theater is completely digital and outfitted with cameras and microphones for concerts, theater and comedy troupes, speakers and lecturers, and so much more. Experience all that Wealthy Theater has to offer. And bring a friend. Be surprised by the Wealthy Theater.
WYCE is a world of music. We aim to shine a light on underserved musical artists in a non-commercial format with no advertisements. Volunteers come in to create personalized music programming that broadcasts over the air at 88.1 FM to West Michigan and via the internet to listeners all over the world. These listeners sponsor our efforts, keeping WYCE independent and community-owned. Musicians use the station to broaden their audience and build support for their latest projects by submitting their music to be included in our broadcast and performing live in studio. Businesses find their customers through underwriting, nonprofits inform the community to their mission, and listeners stay informed about local events. We believe that music is a powerful force that creates quality relationships in our community, that speaks to our emotions, and provides the soundtrack to our lives.
Welcome back to City Connection, and we're continuing our conversation with Judge Nicholas Ayoub and the mayor, and we had a little bit of conversation that ended about a backlog in the courts, and that's our first question here from Javi, and he says, many courts have been backed up with cases due to pandemic, and has that threatened the 61st?
You know, we have, there are certain things you can't do by Zoom. The major one is to have a jury trial. And in a criminal case, there's the constitutional right to a jury trial. However, very few cases ultimately end up in front of a jury trial, specifically in the district court. And I don't know what the numbers are, but I think you would find that probably close to 98% of cases, don't, and that's just a guess, but I think that's probably close, certainly in the 90s, don't end up going to trial. And then sometimes if they do go to trial, may go to a bench trial. So short of trial, we've been able to conduct our dockets through Zoom. And have been able to really move cases along. So you end up with a handful of cases that probably should go to a jury trial. That was on hold for a year. And then we had juries back for a short window over the summer and the fall. And that's now on hold again. But we were able to kind of get caught up in that in the interim. So we're doing all right. We don't have a backlog. Circuit Court, I think, is probably a different story. I don't want to speak for them. But you have a lot more cases that just have to be tried and have to be tried in front of a jury. And I think that's probably, that's a little different story. But for the district court, we were able to keep things moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything about due process that is kind of harmed or hampered by the video connection versus in person?
This is a great question, something I've taken an interest in. Yes, I think there are points in the in procedure where being face to face in the same room with all of the players in the same physical space, you just can't replicate that. You can't substitute that for digital presence, particularly at trial. And there, you know, the right to confront your accuser. There are multiple components to that. Number one, that the accuser can look at the witness when the witness is testifying and can look the witness in the eye, and the jury can look the witness in the eye and measure credibility. You can see somebody on the screen, you know, certainly, and do that over Zoom, but it's just not quite the same. Just to measure body movement, to measure if somebody's really telling the truth. There's something about physical presence that I think is necessary. The flip side of that is that the witness is to see the defendant and know the defendant is there as they're giving their testimony. Well, you can't do that on Zoom. You don't get that. You don't get that back and forth, that give and take. Yeah, in my opinion, for a trial, there would be whether it meets minimum standards of due process, we'll leave that. That's a legal question. But I think there is something that is lacking when you have purely a digital presence. Yeah, but now other things, settlement conferences, motions, arguments, you know, which is the bulk of what courts spend their time on day to day. We found that can be accomplished via Zoom in a fair way, and sometimes we found that you know, using a screen share where you want to display exhibits and that kind of thing, it can actually be pretty effective, even more so than, you know, bringing a foam board into court, you know, which some attorneys still do. Yeah, I can just share my screen. You can see the exhibit right there. It's very effective, very doable. Yeah.
Is there anything that's actually advantaged by that? You mentioned accessibility was something that people really appreciated, at least some.
Yeah. And we're still waiting for the hard data. What I can say is anecdotally, yeah, I think that we have seen it has been very advantageous for people. It's hard to come downtown to the courthouse where we are. We don't have a parking lot. You have to find a place to park. You have to walk to the courthouse. You have to go through security. And for those that don't spend a lot of time in courthouses, you're probably pretty nervous. And so I think you can find some people that just bury their head in the sand and hope that this goes away, and then they don't show up to court. And that's not good for them. Certainly it's no good for the system. And I remember early on, a lady appeared. She had a bench warrant out for 5 or 6 years, and it was, I don't even remember what it was, but it was, you know, a rather petty offense that just needed to be handled. And she appeared over Zoom, and it was clear that she probably has some, you know, some mental illness of some sort. But she appeared and she was in bed, but she was able to get her case handled. And then she got up out of the bed while the hearing is going on and just kind of came to life. And all of a sudden, she just felt comfortable. She was able to get her business handled. We were able to close the case. Justice was served. And I think that's overall making the court more accessible is better for the community. Yeah, and we've seen a lot of people, I think, that appreciate the fact that they could log on when appropriate and get their business handled at the court via Zoom.
Okay. Yeah. You know, we're 2 years into a pandemic at different spikes and lows at different times, but what kind of cases have increased because of that, and what kind of things have decreased during these 2 years?
I think as far as our criminal docket, it's pretty steady. Anecdotally, I'll say the early days of the pandemic, I do think we probably saw an increase in domestic violence, which is a shame. What we did see quite a bit of a change on was landlord-tenant. and the way we handle eviction proceedings, and those all come through the district court. So any eviction case in the city of Grand Rapids will come through the 61st District Court. There was a moratorium on evictions, as you recall, for quite some time. Cases were still being filed, but in a much smaller number. You know, landlords knew the moratorium was in effect, and you know, there's little point in getting a judgment if you can't proceed with eviction. The Supreme Court changed the procedure. We now have to use 2 hearings at the onset of a case, and that provides the landlord kind of a 7-day period to see if they can get some assistance. And there is a significant amount of public assistance that's been made available by the federal government through the SERA program. And we've had plenty of people in the community that have been able to avail themselves of that assistance and stay in their homes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last number I heard, out of the 38 million, close to 22, 23 million had already been dispersed through the SERA program, which is great, helping a lot of families.
Yeah, and even before the pandemic, 61st District Court has an eviction prevention program. And again, that's kind of this connection between the different services that are available, the United Way and Salvation Army, and those folks that have assistance available, making sure that people in the middle of this know that those programs are available and that they can avail themselves of it. Yeah.
I want to squeeze in one more question for you
Sure.
while we have you here, and this one's from Omar, and it jumps back a little bit to what we were talking about a bit ago. It says, for criminal cases that go to trial, what happens to the defendants during that waiting period, during the backlog? You know, if they're jailed extra long, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be.
So that's one of the differences, I think, between the district court and the circuit court. Because we have misdemeanor cases, and generally people that are involved in those cases, certainly there's the exception, but you know, we're not talking about capital crimes where someone may need to be detained prior to trial. Most of the defendants are waiting trial on misdemeanor charges, are released on bond. Sometimes that bond will have requirements, restrictions in place. If it's a domestic violence case, for example, it's made clear there can be no contact, and we have a zero tolerance policy. But the idea is you're presumed innocent, and you're presumed entitled to pretrial release. And as long as we can do this safely, then you'll be released and you'll have your day in court, and a trial will take place. But yeah, circuit court can be a little different. Certainly if somebody's charged with a capital crime, pretrial detention may be necessary, and then there is an additional waiting period. But we haven't had folks that, at least that I can remember, nothing sticks out where somebody remained detained waiting for a jury trial. We're usually able to fix bond conditions so that everyone is safe. We can ensure that the defendant will be back for trial, and then ultimately can wait it out with the defendant able to work and still be productive in society, and not have to be detained pre-trial.
Okay.
And I'll add, that's been a real push at the state level as well, with a lot of the correction reform bills. And there has been quite a bit of progress made with corrections reform, including expungement. So some of the recent laws around expungement, as well as, you know, really looking at, you know, we don't want people to be in jail purely because they can't pay to get out. If they are able to get out and if they're not deemed dangerous or potentially going to be harmful to someone, how do we make sure that is done as quickly as possible?
Okay.
Yeah. And
Judge, go
yeah,
right
I was going
ahead.
to say, if there is a minute left, I'll put a plug in for the clean, what they call the clean slate legislation, and it's really expanded when expungement is available. It's one of the most rewarding things that the district court gets to do, because there's so many folks that have a criminal record. They've run into, they've hit walls because of that. Maybe a significant amount of time has passed. Now, courts have given much greater latitude to expunge those criminal convictions and let people have a fresh start. And so we are seeing a lot more of those applications. Hopefully we'll see even more. Legal Aid of West Michigan is kind of spearheading the effort to get those cases in front of us, and where it's appropriate, I can tell you that it is quite rewarding to be able to say to someone, okay, we can wipe the slate clean. Yeah.
Thank you. Judge Nicholas Ayoub with the 61st District Court. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's
Thank
good to
you.
see you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back after this break here on City Connection.
How do you build a strong local food economy? Meet Chris. Chris is opening Osteria Rosa, a locally sourced Italian restaurant in a building brought back to life by 616 Development. But he doesn't know any local farmers to supply him with food year-round. This is Melissa. Melissa runs the Fulton Street Farmers Market and publishes a long list, even in the dead of winter, of available produce, meats, bakery goods, and more on the Rapidian. This is Amy. Amy wants to do more to support the farmers and her local food economy. Amy talks to Melissa, who introduces her to farmers at the Fulton Street Farmers Market, and Amy, in turn, publishes their stories, also on the Rapidian. Chris hears about the Rapidian and now has access to a local grocery list and information that he needs to make connections with local farmers. He feeds his patrons with local food year-round. Connections multiply. Meals are shared. A stronger local food economy is built.
Again, our thanks for Judge Ayoub joining us today. Learned a lot on that. Now I'm back with Mayor Bliss, and a lot of you have sent some questions already, so we'll get going with that. Kind of the first two reaching back to our mention of the Civilian Appeals Board. So here's the first one. It comes from Georgia, and it says, I've heard the Civilian Appeals Board has to FOIA info from GRPD. Is that true? If so, why is that the case? FOIA, Freedom of Information Act.
So that shouldn't be the case, but I'm happy to follow up with our liaison. So the Civilian Appeals Board, the individual at the city that works with the Civilian Appeals Board, there's actually an individual out of our city attorney's office, but it's Brandon Davis who oversees the Office of Oversight and Accountability. And that office is relatively new, it's less than 2 years old. And obviously there's still a lot of policies and procedures that have been put in place. I know that an issue was raised last year where there was concern that information from the police department was not being shared. Our city manager did address that and put a protocol in place with sharing of information. I anticipate that as we have a new police chief come on, this will be one of the most important conversations as we look at how the Office of Public Oversight and Accountability works with the new chief and the department, but also ensuring that those who serve on the Civilian Appeals Board have access to the information that they need when there is an appeal, they feel informed in order to make a decision. There is a caveat. Some of the information that the Civilian Appeals Board is privy to is is confidential, so they can't necessarily have it sent to them. They have to come into the office into almost like an executive session. So I know that that is part of the process. And as I said, I'm happy to follow up, but that really shouldn't be the case. And that's our hope, is how do we make sure that the Civilian Appeals Board has the ability to do their job when there is an appeal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question related to that mention of the Civilian Appeals Board being reimagined. This one from Travis, and it says, what were the issues with the Civilian Appeals Board that needed correction?
Yeah, I would say, it's always good to revisit and re-examine to make sure that our boards and commissions are evolving and addressing the issues at hand. So what Brandon Davis did is he actually reviewed Public Safety Committee, the SAFE Task Force, the Chiefs Advisory Board, the Civilian Appeals Board, and made recommendations based on some of the feedback. He met with all those boards, he met with community members, and some of the recommendations were around size, around length of appointments, also around adequate training that board should get, in addition to, when somebody is appointed to a board or commission, we give them some basic, I would say, tutorials around conflicts of interest, Open Meetings Act requirements, the Robert's Rules of Order, so kind of your nuts and bolts about serving on a public body. But the Civilian Appeals Board really requires more than that. So part of it was training, and what does that entail? Expectations of the board. And so some of it was much more structural, I would say, to that body, and just being much more clear about expectations.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and this is something we'll follow because it's a process has begun, and with a new chief coming on, we'll hear more.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, we have a question from Sam. This has to do with zoning. So let me read this to you, Mayor. It says, with regard to the recent conversations about zoning and development, those of us in Elginger Heights and Garfield Park were not represented by our city commissioners. Our almost unanimous opposition was disregarded, and our concerns were even patronized in the commission's justifying of the decision to ignore us. What kind of accountability and representation should we expect from our city commissioners? And that's from Sam.
Yeah, so that's a great question. This was an issue that came up at our last city commission meeting. It's a project that is being proposed in partnership with Dwelling Place through a community land trust. And there's a parcel of land that Dwelling Place, in partnership with a few other nonprofit partners, identified as being a good location to build owner-occupied affordable housing with the tool of a community land trust. And there was a lot of feedback at the Planning Commission as well about this project. Some changes were made, some concerns were raised about design, some about traffic. We did do a traffic study. So I wouldn't say that neighbors' concerns were not listened to and looked into, especially the concerns around traffic. There were some concerns raised that it was going to lower surrounding property values. We found that there's just not data that supports that. So it's always this balance, right? Like we make decisions that sometimes residents aren't happy with, even after they express their concerns to us. But really having to take into consideration the proposal before us, is this an appropriate use for that land? And does it fit into our greater needs in the community and vision to do what we can to make sure that we have different types of housing and different income points, so different income level housing throughout the city in all of our neighborhoods, instead of having it concentrated in certain neighborhoods. And so, it is a balance. Not every project is supported. This one had unanimous support at our Planning Commission, and then came to the City Commission for approval, and that's when we approved it. And so I don't want neighbors who shared their concerns to feel like they weren't heard. Another concern we heard was about design, and our planning director and the developers are going back and meeting with neighbors to hear more concerns about the design and to make changes. So I do believe that there are going to be some adjustments made to take into consideration and try to address the concerns of the neighbors. But ultimately, anytime that you take a piece of land that people have historically appreciated as green space and you add a little bit higher density housing to it, I understand that there are concerns about that. And what the conversation around the city commission table is that we really need to look at each of these developments and do what we can to support both the neighborhood, but also support infill and affordable housing. And these are owner occupied, which is something we desperately need in this community, is more access to ownership at that affordability level.
Right, right. Well, thanks for Sam's question, and
It's a
thanks, Mayor,
great
for
question.
addressing that. Let's tick through a few of the other things
Yeah.
that the city has going on, and you brought up to me the participatory budgeting process
Yes.
that's going about, and that was initiated
Last year.
too. Yes.
Yeah. So the participatory budgeting process is a process I'm very excited about. Last year, the City Commission allocated $2 million, $1 million for the third ward, $600,000 for the first, and $400,000 for the second. We appointed a body of 9 people to help create a process where individuals in each of those wards would be able to submit ideas that were kind of fit within the parameters of the dollars, because we are using federal ARPA dollars. And then we'll go through a voting process where people in those wards will be able to vote, and then we'll take the highest vote getting ideas, and we'll start to look at how we can fund those with those dollars. So this is, I've been familiar with participatory budgeting. Other cities have done it. They've done it in a little bit different ways. There's a national participatory budgeting organization that we actually contracted with to help us with this process. And this is, I'd say, a larger pot of money than most other cities do for participatory budgeting. But I believe it's consistent with us really wanting to empower our neighbors to come up with ideas to invest in their own neighborhoods. So I'm excited. The portal is open. You can go to grpb.org, so Grand Rapids Participatory Budgeting, grpb.org, and you can submit your ideas on a portal, and we'll start to generate those ideas and then vet them, and then there'll be, I think the portal is open until the end of May, and then we'll start to solidify those and then have the process for voting. And then my hope is that we make decisions about how those dollars are spent yet this year, hopefully by the end of the summer.
Okay. Well, we've been kind of policy heavy and a little dense with the
Yeah.
topics today, so with our last minute or so, want to throw a couple of others at you. The first one is Redwood, the city is adding bus shelters, and just a little bit about how, working with the Rapid and how that works.
Yeah, so we allocated over $200,000 to invest in improving and adding bus shelters throughout the city. And we're contracting with the Rapid to do it, so they'll do it so that the shelters are consistent with the system. It's been on our priority list for a long time. We want to make sure that people, when they are waiting, they have access to shelter. And it's really going to be at some of our more heavily used bus stops, so it's not going to be every bus stop.
Okay.
There are thousands of bus stops throughout the city, so we're really focusing on certain lines where we have heavy utilization and where we know that the individuals using those bus stops could use shelter.
Got it. And then the last one is something you're fairly closely connected with, Mayor's Youth Council. They're doing a winter coat drive that goes through the 4th of March, is that right?
They are. So my Mayor's Youth Council, it's a great group of students. I meet with them. I just met with a smaller group. I do a coffee hour with them in smaller groups, and then I meet with the full group every month. But it's a really an incredible group of high schoolers that I work with every year. And they're doing this coat drive in partnership with the Grand Rapids Public Library.
So at any library then, these can
yeah.
be dropped off.
Yes, and then they'll work to get those distributed to other teenagers in our city that need a coat. They're also working on Kids Speak, so that's always in April. It's just a wonderful group of young people, and I enjoy getting to know them and hearing their perspective, and really helps me be a better mayor.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we'll close out. We're out of time, and just want to let folks know next month we're 1 week later, so you'll see us back here March 14th. Thanks for joining us on City Connection here on GRTV's Livewire Channel 24. With Mayor Bliss, I'm Linda Galash.